not be the same. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. I suppose we all thought that, one way or another.
Eliminating nuclear weapons seems to be the democratic wish of the world's people. Yet no nuclear-armed country currently appears to be preparing for a future without these terrifying devices. In fact, governments like the US, Britain and France spend billions of dollars on modernization of their nuclear forces. And some say they have made a mockery of the United Nations pledges to disarm these weapons of mass destruction.
I stayed in the Soviet Union during the communist days for almost 10 years. And just like many other Russian people there, we were always afraid that America is going to attack with nuclear weapons. The same, I'm sure, Americans were fearing that Russians were going to attack. Now, interestingly, ironically, there was that state of fear that made each of the superpowers not attack the other. Now, we have moved on. There's no Cold War anymore. But the level of violence seems to be just increasing.
The United States plays a particular role in the whole nuclear weapons, global nuclear weapons system. Every other state possesses nuclear weapons in the world, directly or indirectly, as a result of the United States' introduction of nuclear weapons and in terms of their strategic relationship. Russia clearly possesses nuclear weapons to balance out the Americans. The Chinese possess nuclear weapons to balance out the Russians and the Americans. The Indians possess nuclear weapons to balance out the Chinese. The Pakistanis have nuclear weapons to balance out the Indians. And so it goes on. It all comes down to America's possession of nuclear weapons and particularly America's commitment to the ideology of maintaining nuclear weapons and seeing nuclear weapons as the currency of global power.
Throughout the ages, man has developed weapons to protect its people and sovereignty. But there are times those weapons were used to threaten others into submission. 16th century Italian political scientist Machiavelli stressed the importance of governing people by advocating fear, a philosophy some leaders still share.
I believe the United States of America must remain a standard bearer in the conduct of war. That is what makes us different from those whom we fight. That is a source of our strength.
The shadow of the threat of nuclear bombs is cast over the whole world. While some governments argue that the existence of nuclear bombs forms stability, others foresee a doomed future.
I was in Moscow, I was in Leningrad, St. Petersburg now. Walking around, life looks to be normal. But every single day, everything took you back every day to think about the threat that was facing you as a human being, and then Russia and Soviet Union as a group of nations. Many Russian friends of mine, many Russian people that I could see, were living a life of fear.
They have produced peace out of fear. That cannot be sustainable peace. The world cannot live on peace out of fear. That in itself is a threat to humans' peace of mind.
We have some very original experiences in our region of the world. First of all, Latin America became the first region to create a non-nuclear area, which is enshrined in the Tlatelolco Treaty of the late 60s.
For over 60 years, the United Nations has been unable to establish sustainable security in the world. Although the majority of nations pursue a world free of nuclear weapons, the more dominant nuclear-armed states are reluctant to give up their weapons of mass destruction, creating a geopolitical fear to other states that choose to keep the bombs as a deterrent. Following the end of the Cold War, 18 countries held nuclear weapons, but in 1989, prior to the collapse of the apartheid regime, South Africa disarmed its nuclear arms. And in 1995, Kazakhstan voluntarily relinquished its entire nuclear weapons stockpile and joined the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Belarus and Ukraine did the same the following year. Countries without nuclear bombs continue to voice their concern and call for a world without them. An event attracting representatives from over 60 countries was hosted in Tehran, Iran, calling for global nuclear disarmament and the right to peaceful nuclear energy. Western powers claim Iran is in pursuit of making bombs. It's evident some medias offer a view of Iran as a nuclear-armed menace. However, evidence shows the country is far from this. Iran is a signatory of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. It has repeatedly been free of any evidence from UN inspectors for developing nuclear bombs. Furthermore, the leader of the Islamic Republic issued a fatwa on nuclear weapons, considering the pursuit and possession of the weapons a grave sin. Many NGOs and governments around the world are now comprehending that the threat of nuclear bombs must come to an end, united in a vision that all countries should have zero nuclear weapons. But the reality of this has proven to be a far greater challenge.
South Africa is being used by a number of people as an example of how the Israelis, for example, could disarm. Because the Israelis have not admitted they have nuclear weapons. There is no official statement that they have it, just as South Africa did not admit. And it could be that there may be a model, and there may be lessons to learn from the South African experience that could mean that the Israelis could follow that model and get rid of their nuclear weapons, which they do have, everyone realises, even though they don't admit to it.
It angers me to know that Israel was one of those regimes that went out there to support the apartheid regime to set up that type of situation. I don't think that the South Africans, the apartheid South African government, would have thought, well, we just need to be a nuclear power so that we are like America and play our role in the Cold War. No. They must have wanted to have those nuclear weapons so that, first of all, they can cause mayhem around on the African continent. And if Africa united against them, which Africa had done during the struggles, they have that capacity and potential to destroy the African continent.
After the South Africans disarmed, that then enabled the whole of Africa to join in to becoming a nuclear weapon-free zone.
Although at the time of the 1968, when the NPT was formed, there was some kind of weapons program going on in Israel, but they somehow escaped signing, pretending or saying that we are not making it, so they didn't sign the treaty. So that way, they are not under pressure. One country is perceived as threat, like Iran. There is no real evidence that Iran is making nuclear weapons. In the case of Israel, there is no pressure, because that is considered the ally of US. So they can have the nuclear weapons.
Iran is being constantly threatened by war and sanctions, etc., for having even thought of nuclear weapon. At the same time, Israel has had nuclear weapon for at least for decades and a large number of warheads. With another comparison, when we consider another comparison, the hypocrisy shows itself better. Iran has never been at war with any country throughout in the past 200 years, except that the war that Iraq imposed on Iran, and Iran had to defend itself. In comparison, Israel has constantly been at war since its creation with all its neighbors. Every now and then there is the fire of war between Israel and its neighbors. Yet Israel is not a threat to the security and peace of the region. Iran is. This hypocrisy, I do not think will allow peace and security, especially in the region of the Middle East, to spread, to flourish.
A document released in Britain in December 2010 revealed that Israel was prepared to use a nuclear bomb in the event of an armed conflict with its neighbours. The official paper discloses communications between a former British ambassador in Tel Aviv and the UK Foreign Office in May 1980. The document reads, if they are to be destroyed, they will go down fighting this time. They will be ready to use their atomic weapon. With a rapidly changing Middle East, if the Zionist government's hostility grows towards its neighbours in the region, this could increase the risk of a nuclear missile strike.
Israel, probably more than any other state in the world, has had more resolutions passed against it and has broken those resolutions. And yet it seems to be able to exist without any sanctions because it is protected by the United States.
I think with all these things that we're seeing right now in terms of Arab Spring and people revolutions and so on, a new dispensation is evolving now. And I believe that this new dispensation in the Middle East will mean that we start having stable governments that are for their own people, stable governments that are democratic and so on. And I believe that usually those types of stable governments will seek to have negotiations, to have peaceful approaches to solving conflicts. People themselves, simple people in the Middle East, and now we're seeing simple people in Israel, are starting to rise up for change. So I think that we should put much more focus and much more support and perhaps our belief that the people can now force governments like Israel to do the right thing. They can force the United Nations, they can force the Americans to do the right thing.
There is a worldwide reluctance to think about what the consequences would be if nuclear weapons were used. It was discovered that virtually nothing is being published anywhere in the world on the self-destructive use of nuclear weapons, despite the great peril they present to all. The horrors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki remain a permanent scar on the world. But the horrors didn't stop there. Numerous countries tested nuclear bomb explosions, seeking ways to strengthen their destructive force.